You're entitled. You think that as long as you want something, you get it because that's what your parents taught you. So now when you go out in the real world and you realize life's not like that, you crash and burn. You crash and burn because you're so used to things being handed to you. You're used to living in good times, and those good times have created a weak you. What's up, guys? Welcome to the Man Solution Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Miranda, aka Man of Men. On this podcast, we discuss various topics related to self improvement, breaking bad habits and thought patterns, and ultimately overcoming generational curses. If you're a man who's struggling to become the best version of yourself, then this podcast is for you. We appreciate your support. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. And it'd be great if you find value in this episode today. Share it with someone you know. Share it with someone who you also think would find value, because that helps us spread our message and get this value out to more people. So greatly appreciate that. But let's dive in today. This episode is special because it marks the 10th official episode. So I kind of have a little something a little different today. The format today is going to be more so of a presentation in a way, than a conversation or a monologue, I should say. So I highly encourage you all, if you can, watch the video. I don't know how you're listening right now, but I think it'd be cool to watch the video as well. I have a few slides prepared for you all. But um, with that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. So now I want you guys to follow along, and I'm going over something that I've talked about, um, you know, previously, but in a really short form. I may have posted about it a few times, but I never really explained what this means, right? So I'm sure you all have heard the phrase "hard times create strong men," right? What it is it's a poem, and I don't remember who it's from. You guys can look it up, um, but it really highlights a truth about society overall, right? So we're going to walk through this. I'll explain, what the cycle is. We'll talk about the timeline of like the last 80 years and how this cycle has shown its true colors inside of our society. We'll talk about where we are now, what we can do as individuals, and then what we can do as a nation. So I know you're all wondering, like, okay, hard times create strong men, sure, poem, whatever. What are you talking about? What does this mean? So it's the full stanza, I should say, is hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times, right? So this is a perpetual cycle that all societies go through over and over and over again. And what we see throughout history is that it seems to be around an 80-year cycle. And every individual phase seems to take about 20 years, right? And what seems to happen is that after the 80-year cycle, it seems to always end in war. When you look back 80 years ago, well, that was about World War II. If you look back 80 years before that, you got the American Civil War. 80 years before that, the American Revolutionary War. Right? So it seems that history continues to repeat itself. Right? I know we've heard that often. And it seems that if history repeats itself, then all we can do is be prepared for what's to come. Right? But I'm sure you all want to understand. I'm sure you all are curious as to what this looks like. as to how exactly this plays out in society. So let's go back over the last 80 years and break this cycle down into segments and make sense of it. So, of course, we have hard times creating strong men during 1940 to 1960. Those strong men will then create good times until about the 80s. Those good times will create weak men until about 2000. And those weak men will have created hard times for us here in 2020. So we'll walk through this. We'll begin by discussing how, difficult times such as economic recessions, wars, uh, or even natural disasters really force individuals to adapt, develop resilience to survive. And historically, strong leaders have, usually emerged during these times. You have like Winston Churchill during World War II, uh, Franklin D. Roosevelt during the Great Depression. Adversity usually plays a significant role in fostering character development, self reliance, and resourcefulness. And next, we'll explore how strong individuals with a deep understanding of hardship are more likely to implement policies and make decisions that lead to prosperity and stability. Strong leaders often prioritize long term well being and growth over short term gains, as demonstrated by Nelson Mandela in South Africa or Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. However, during periods of prolonged peace and prosperity, complacency can set in, and people might lose appreciation for the hardships faced by previous generations. Comfort and ease can sometimes result in a loss of essential values and skills, such as self sufficiency, determination, and perseverance. We can observe this in historical events like the decline of the Roman Empire or the fall of the Ming Dynasty. And then finally, we'll discuss how these weak individuals who lack an understanding of hardship may make decisions that prioritize short term gains over long term stability, leading to societal decline. These decisions can then result in economic crisis, social unrest, or even war, right? And we're back to the start. Examples from history, you would see the Great Depression, the French Revolution. So, kind of wrapping this up, like the this cycle demonstrates the connection between adversity and prosperity, and it highlights the importance of strong leadership and character development in our shaping world. Right? This cycle goes on over and over and over again. Hard times create strong men. Those strong men now build good, strong societies to create good times. The individuals who grow up inside of those good, safe, economically sound societies become weak because they get comfortable, they get complacent, they don't know what it's like to live in hard times. So they don't understand the value in ensuring that you're prepared for hard times. They don't understand the value in ensuring that you live a righteous life. They don't understand the value in ensuring that you make the right decisions because they have everything given to them. And because of that, you then create a society where this new generation creates hard times again because they prioritize what is going to benefit them right now in the present versus making sure that they're making decisions that are going to set up the society to succeed in the long run. Right? So let's go back to 1940 to 1960. So just listing out some events here. You can have your own opinion as to whether these events were good or bad. There's arguments for both. There always will be. I assume everyone has a different perspective. But what I want to highlight is the overall zeitgeist of these specific terms, of these specific periods of times, right? So when we look back at the times from the 40s to the 60s, um, Obviously, what we know is the United States was in war, right? After Pearl Harbor, World War II starts, and that, of course, results in significant hardships, loss of life, rationing, and, of course, economic challenges, right? However, it also spurred industrial growth, technological advancements, increased employment opportunities, strong leaders, right? Like FDR really guided the nation through the war, um, implementing policies like the Lend-Lease Act to support the Allies and the GI Bill to help veterans transition back to civilian life after war, right? So now we have this post-war economic boom. So after the war, the United States experiences a period of substantial economic growth, rising standards of living, increased home ownership, widespread job opportunities. So this boom was fueled by factors such as increased consumer spending. We have the baby boom, government uh, investing heavily in infrastructure and education. So a lot of things are taking place at this point. We also have the Cold War. The United States really at this point entered a period of tension essentially with the Soviet Union. So now there's competition in areas like technology, military power, ideological influence. We have the arms race, the space race, numerous proxy conflicts all around the world. You have strong leaders like President Harry Truman, who implemented policies like the Marshall Plan to help rebuild Western Europe, contain the spread of communism. Right, so these are monumental events that are taking place during this time, and these are things that are essentially hard times. These are hard times that are creating struggle. Like when you have the civil rights movement, right? We're having the struggle for racial equality and an end to segregation in the United States. So now they're gaining momentum during this period. You have key events like Brown versus Board, Brown, uh, Montgomery bus boycott, uh, MLK is coming out during this time, advocating for nonviolent protests, civil disobedience, um, and this marks a period where the turmoil is creating friction, which then creates uh, gain capacity, gain capacity for greatness, a gained understanding of what's right, a gained understanding of what's better, right? It's that friction, it's the turmoil, it's the pain, the poverty that instills in the society that we need to create a better future. We need to work towards creating a better future. And these are some examples of people doing that during this period. So these hard times that, created strong men now leads to more strong men creating good times. So the 60s through the 80s, it's really a period of economic growth and prosperity. So during this time, the United States experienced considerable economic growth, low unemployment rates, increased consumer spending, expansion of various industries. Of course, we still have the civil rights movement and social progress. Um, the civil rights movement in the 60s really led to significant progress in the fight for racial equality, end of segregation. The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act are really important milestones. The women's rights movement really gained a lot of momentum during this period with achievements like the Equal Pay Act of 1963, passage of Title IX in 1972, the space race between the US and the Soviet Union, of course, as I mentioned, led to some of these more rapid advancements. We had the historic Apollo 11 moon landing in 69. And there's other technological advancements like uh, computing, telecommunications, and that really set the stage for a digital revolution that would follow in the coming decades. During this time, we also have the Vietnam War. While it was a significant conflict that resulted in the loss of life, strained domestic politics, it's also important to note that its end in 1975 marked the conclusion of a major military engagement for the United States during this period. Uh, some strong leaders during this period are, JFK, Lyndon B. Johnson, Richard Nixon. They all implemented policies that shaped the United States during this time. They obviously are navigating various challenges like the Cuban Missile Crisis, of course, the Civil Rights Movement, like we talked about, and early stages of friction with the Soviet Union. I think during these times, overall, there was a period of counterculture, right? So, which is basically the agitation for equal opportunity, and it really sparked other forms of upheaval. So, young people in particular rejected the stable patterns of middle class life their parents had created in the decades after World War II. Some plunged into radical political activity. Many more embraced new standards of dress and sexual behavior. Right? So these strong men are creating a better society to live in, a more safe, fair, prosperous society to live in, which is great. Why not? I think that's what most of us want in this world is a better society for all of us. So what's the issue with that? With that, I think the issue comes in when those good times um, shape the environment that these new generations come up in, because then these new generations don't understand what struggling is. So all they're focused on is just the good times. They're not focused on the sustainment of those good times. They're not focused on ensuring that the future generations are going to be marked by good times. They're only focused oftentimes on hedonism, on pleasure, which is, as you understand, fleeting. It's temporary, doesn't benefit you long term. So, what we see in the 1980s and 90s, this is a period that's marked by significant economic growth, a booming stock market, increased consumerism. So, this prosperity may have led to complacency, maybe a shift in focus towards material wealth and short term gains, potentially eroding values like self sufficiency and resilience. We also had political divisions in the United States that deepened. So this is really leading to an inability to address long-term issues, health, like around healthcare, income inequality, education. So this partisanship may have hindered strong leadership, and it really results in politicians prioritizing short-term political victories over the nation's long-term well-being, and we see a lot of that today as well. So during this time, the Cold War ends. We emerge as the world's sole superpower. So this new status may have created a sense of invulnerability. It may create some complacency because at this time, the United States no longer faces an immediate existential threat. We have the rise of individualism, consumerism, and the me culture during this period. This, of course, contributes to a decline in the importance of collective responsibility, the values of self-sacrifice, perseverance, and resilience. And of course, those values were more prevalent during the harder times. And it's those values that set the stage for people to create the good times that allowed consumerism, that allowed this me culture. It's the values of self sacrifice, perseverance, and resilience and grit that allow the rise of individualism. How often do we see this, even on a smaller scale? Right now, we're talking about society overall. How often do we see this at a smaller scale with individual families? If you have When you think of a family who, let's say your grandparents were poor, they had nothing. And let's say they migrated here. They were from another country. They migrated here. They may have fled somewhere really horrible, came to the United States, made something for themselves. They struggled. They had your parents, and all they were focused on was putting food on the table and ensuring that your parents had a good life and that they had opportunity. So now your parents, they take the opportunity that was given to them, and they may have had a mediocre life. They may have not struggled as much as your grandparents did, but your parents really worked hard to build something for themselves because they knew the sacrifice their parents made. So they may have gotten a good career. Maybe they went the route of college and got the right degree, and maybe they started a business, whatever it is. So maybe they're financially doing really well. So they made a lot of sacrifices because they understand the sacrifices that were made for them, and they didn't want those sacrifices to go in vain. So they truly create financial prosperity. They create a life that is worth living. And then they have you. Then they have you. And when you were raised in a big house. You're raised with food on the table all the time. You're going on vacations. You get bought whatever you want to get bought. Any type of technology or toys or clothes or fashion. You get bought the cars and they give you the allowance, and you're just, living the flashy lifestyle as a kid and as a teenager. You're living the life. You get everything you ever wanted, everything and more. So now, because everything's handed to you, now because everything is given to you on a silver platter, you do not understand what it's like to suffer. You do not understand what it's like to have to work for something. You do not understand what it's like to show what perseverance is, to show what resilience is. You don't understand those things. You do not understand that. You're entitled now. You're entitled. You think that as long as you want something, you get it because that's what your parents taught you. So now when you go out in the real world and you realize life's not like that, you crash and burn. You crash and burn because you're so used to things being handed to you. You're used to living in good times, and those good times have created a weak you. So now what? What happens to your children now? Do they also have to suffer? They do. Oftentimes they do. Because now these weak men in this situation, this weak person, it could be a man or a woman, this weak person is now going to create hard times. Now, who gets raised in those hard times? Your children. This happens all the time. This happens all the time. Even when we think of extremely wealthy families, it's very, very difficult to keep the wealth in your family going past, let's say, 2 generations. If it gets past 2 generations, that's impressive. That's very impressive. Because oftentimes what happens in these wealthy families is exactly what I just explained. So if we get back to society in the US, how have weak men or how are weak men going to create these hard times? I know 2000 to 2020, very interesting times. 2001, we have the terrorist attacks in the United States. That really marked the beginning of a new era of global terrorism and instability. And then the subsequent war on terror, uh, interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq, that obviously led to long-lasting conflicts, loss of life, financial burdens. We had the 2008 financial crisis, uh, driven in part by deregulation, financial mismanagement, and ultimately a lack of oversight that led to a global recession. Millions of people lost their jobs, homes, savings. That, of course, caused widespread economic hardship. The United States experienced at this time increased political polarization, social unrest during this period, of course, fueled by issues such as racial inequality, gun control, immigration, the same things, right? The same things as today. This, of course, hinders effective leadership. It exacerbates existing societal problems. We also had the urgency of addressing climate change. Environmental challenges now become more apparent. Political and economic factors often are impeding progress, which just leads to worsening environmental conditions and increased natural disasters due to policy. We also have the rise of social media and misinformation. The widespread adoption of social media platforms facilitates the spread of misinformation and fake news. So, of course, this really contributes to a unreasonable trust and faith in institutions and experts and media, making it harder for the American people to actually get what's right for them, to actually get what's owed to them versus being played, being manipulated, being used, right? Being tricked by propaganda. So when we think about this overall, right? We go back to that timeline. We have World War II era, hard times, made men very tough. Those men come back and say, hey, we need to build a better society. Let's build it. And they do that. And that better society creates a safe place for the new generations to be raised in. Those new generations get very complacent. And that complacency leads to a erosion of culture from the inside out. It leads to societal decay from the inside out. And that decay is shown very clearly today because it's in today, 2023, that we've started this next phase of hard times creating strong men. Very pivotal point. Very pivotal point in society. Because why are we in hard times? That's a question. What about today signals that we're in hard times? And then two, if we are in hard times, what are we going to do about it? We'll talk about that. But first, let's talk about why we're in hard times. Well, it's it's been predicted, and of course, this is not an exhaustive list here. I'm sure you can add a bunch more on this, but Social Security and Medicare expected to be absolved by 2030. So all of you who are relying on Social Security when you plan on retiring, what are you going to do when it's not there? Or Medicare. We have the retirement crisis paired with that. Of course, we know that most Americans do not have enough to retire. Most Americans aren't even planning on retirement. I'm sure you, if you're under the age of 45, it's probably not even crossing your mind. If you're my age, I'm 29, I'm almost 100% sure it's not crossing your mind. Because again, we're relying on the infrastructure that was created for us to have good times. We're relying on someone else to feed us and take care of us. That's what happens in good times. We have the population declining. We have inflation. 40% of US dollars in existence were printed in 2020. I'm going to read that again. 40% of US dollars in existence were printed in 2020. 40% of all the money ever printed was printed in 2020. For those of you who don't know what inflation is, it's when the value of the dollar decreases. Right? So inflation is, back in the day, we can get 4 bags of chips for $1. Now you go, it's like $1.15, and it's 50% less chips in the bag. That's inflation. Inflation is why the cost of living has tripled or more since the 80s. Inflation is why gas is so expensive now. Inflation is why at the end of the month, you just don't understand why you don't have any money left. When you're still buying the same things you used to buy, you're still buying the same amount of groceries. You're still paying the same for rent, probably, or rent's gone up too. But you're still making the same purchases, but all of the purchases are now more expensive, right? We have credit card debt at 986 billion. It's probably gone up since I've last checked this. Student loan debt, 1.75 trillion. We have the bipartisan culture today, right? It's either you're left or you're right. Either you're good or you're bad. Either you're pro this or anti this. When we understand it's not that black and white, right? We have corrupt politicians. Hell, I mean, I think it just became, just found out that the Biden family is receiving payments from foreign countries like China. How? That's treason. That's treason. But we just let it slide because he's just the old guy, right? Corrupt politicians, they're all over the place. They're all over this nation. I don't understand why we have faith in a politician. They don't serve us, they serve themselves. Number one job of a politician is to get reelected. It's not to save you, it's not to give you your rights, it's not to grant you equality, it's to get reelected. So they're going to use every tool in their bag to manipulate you. They're going to use propaganda to instill pain and fear in your heart so that way they can give you a solution. They can broadcast a solution to you in exchange for your vote. You have a lack of family values. We just covered that in a previous episode. A rise in atheism, nihilism, hedonism. A rise in effeminate men and masculine women. We talked about this too, right? These swapping polarities. Subversion. For those of you who don't know what subversion is, it's when someone, an opposing enemy, implants their ideologies into our infrastructure, which is why our universities are the way they are. This is why when you go to a university in the United States, you get taught communism, Leninism, Stalinism, the isms, right? You get taught the isms. That's subversion. Our curriculum has been hijacked by foreign enemies intentionally because we're at war. That's how wars are fought today. It's an ideological war. That's part of it. There's ideological wars. There's economic wars. There's also obviously kinetic wars, like what we see going on with Ukraine and Russia. But we, as the United States, are at war. It's a cultural war, and we're obviously losing. We have a lack of common enemy, right? Some people think the enemies are the Republicans. Some people think the enemies are Democrats. Some people think the enemy's Trump. Some people think the enemy's Biden. Some people think the enemy's Russia, China. Some people think it's white people. Some people think it's black people. Some people think it's Hispanics. We have a lack of a common enemy. This is the reason the United States was so united when 9/11 happened is because we then were granted a common enemy. And it doesn't matter who you were, where you came from, we had one enemy, and that was terrorist. At that point, that was what we were fed, is terrorists from the Middle East. So doesn't matter who you were on board with going to war with these individuals. We now had a common enemy. Today, we don't have that, which is why we're so divided. We have extreme diversity, right? When you look at the situations with diversity, inclusivity, you look at these ESG scores that they're rating companies on now, which is garbage. Um, we no longer um, we no longer hire and promote for merit. We hire and promote to make sure we're hitting our ESG score. We need to make sure we have the right amount of Black people or Hispanic people or gay people inside of our organization, because if we don't, our ESG score gets lowered and we're looked at negatively in the space. Clownery. Clownery. Fatherless homes. We covered that as well. Consumerism. Right? That ties back to the credit card debt. Continued obesity. Right? We are fatter than we've ever been. And paired with this, we have a culture of fat praising. Right? People saying you're big is beautiful. It's not. It's not. You can be beautiful and big at the same time, yes. But you're not beautiful solely because you're big. You're unhealthy. You're unhealthy. Obesity is not an outfit that you wear to look good. Obesity is a lack of health. It's bad health. It's you ensuring that you die sooner. And that, I don't think that's just not funny to me. Like, it's all this stuff is almost like joked around with. That's not funny. It's not cute. And it surely isn't beautiful. The same way we look at someone who may be an alcoholic or a drug addict. We look at them and we say, man, like, what are you doing? Why are you killing yourself right now? You're killing yourself. Why? Stop. Obesity is no different. You just replace the alcohol with food. That's like saying you're a drug addict. Oh, I'm addicted and beautiful. No, you're killing yourself. This isn't funny. You're messing with your life. You're messing with your life. And the fact that we have these media companies pushing these narratives shows you how much they care about your livelihood. We have an addiction to porn, addiction to video games, a lack of rites of passage in our young men. Right? Men do not have a rites of passage today. It used to be you're a boy, you're nurtured by your mother, and then at some point when you're old enough, you go off with your father and you spend more time with your father. And your father teaches you as a young boy how to be a man. He teaches you what we value. He teaches you how to build your character, build a righteous character. He teaches you what a quality life looks like. He sets the example, and he holds you in high regard, and he has high standards for you. And he puts you through tough challenges that create a stronger you. But today we have the teenager, right? We have this phase in kids' lives where we just allow them to be disrespectful because, oh, they're a teenager. We just allow them to make bad decisions because, oh, they're just a teenager. We just allow them to be lazy and just kick their feet up on the couch and play video games and watch movies because, oh, they're just a teenager. When what they ought to be doing as a very, very young adult you know, shouldn't they be setting themselves up to prepare for adulthood? Why is a teenager a concept? Because of school? Because we want them in schools? Because society wants our kids in schools so they can indoctrinate them into their set of beliefs and values, and then so they can send them to the universities, and they can give you the scholarship, so that way, or not the scholarship, they can give you the student loan, so that way you can spend the rest of your life trying to pay it off, and the government just collects interest off of you, and yeah, you're indoctrinated and you're broke. Success. You're a great teenager. Good job, right? Makes no sense. We also have the divorce rates extremely high, 50%. It may be higher now for first time marriages. I think it's like 60 for second time marriages, and I want to say it may be like 70 for third. You guys can double check that, but uh, might be off a few points. But either way, you get the point, right? It's an issue. You have the mainstream media pushing all these ridiculous fucking narratives. We have extreme tolerance today, right? Paired with modern feminism and MGTOW. MGTOW is men going their own way, which is like the male version of modern feminism. We have Marxist Leninist ideals. We have the Black Lives Matter organization, a group of corrupt victims. We have the LGBTQ mafia, which obviously, as we know today, is not about equality. It's about indoctrinating children. It's about perversion in children. It's almost a religion today. It's not about what it used to be, right? We have single mother praising. We praise single mothers as if that's something to be excited about, as if that's something to be um, happy about, as if we should celebrate that idea. When we covered the impact of fatherless homes a few episodes back, why are we praising that? Why are we celebrating that? If a child who's raised with both mother and father has the same chances of success as a child that's raised with just a father, but a child raised with just a mother is significantly more likely to end up in jail, end up on drugs, end up homeless, end up broke, end up uneducated. If that's true, then why are we praising this? Statistically, why are we praising this notion as if it's cool, as if it's okay? Why? Because the last point here, we have a dependence on welfare. Thanks to the government and their policy to create good times. Let me give you money. Yes, it's okay, I got you. I'll give you money so you can rely on me because I'm creating good times for you. Don't worry. Just sit back and relax. So I think what we see today is there's a lot of people who are on welfare solely because they don't want to get a job, solely because they know that if they got a job, they'll lose that welfare check. Or obviously, we see women having multiple children solely because they get more money for tax returns, right? They can have multiple baby fathers because their baby's father or their baby's fathers, she can go ahead and put all of them on child support and collect multiple checks and finesse the system with zero regard for the livelihood of those children. That's what we've created. This is what our policy has done to our culture. It's sick, it's perverted. And it's these things that are rotting the culture from the inside out. So, what can we do as individuals? Number one, work towards sovereignty. I think you should aim at severing all reliance from institutions as best as possible. Homeschool your kids if you can, start a side business if you can, learn to farm if you can. And I think you can do these things at a very small level and just start. Also, monitor your health. You should be fit for service. If you're a man, you should be fit for service. You should be capable of defending yourself and your family if need be. You should learn how to operate a firearm and administer first aid at the very basic level. And last, you should also be attentive to issues and focus on practical application for you and your family. Everything that has led us here is due to broken principles. Learn what those principles are and teach your family so as not to repeat the problem. So essentially, the answer to this is focus on yourself, is get out of your own way, is solve yourself, which is why we're here, is to focus on the things that we talk about in this podcast. That's what you can do as an individual. And as a nation, we must remember. It's said that the only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. Most of us don't understand how we got here because we don't understand history. We don't understand how the series of events have led to us today. We don't understand how the series of events have led to such societal decay. So because we don't understand it, we're not able to pick out the warning signs and the red flags of when we see it happening again. So 60 years from now, when we have another cycle of good times creating weak men, if we do not teach our children, if we do not teach each other about this cycle, about the pitfalls of society, then we just ensure that this cycle continues. And not only do we ensure that it continues, we ensure it continues at an extreme level. Because I think some of these things can be tapered down. I think some of these things can be a bit watered down. If we knew they were coming, if we knew how to prepare for them, if we had more men that were fit for service, if we had more men that were sovereign, we'd benefit less from the good times that were given to us because we would have created our own good times. And we would teach others how to ensure the good times remain versus having to be handed good times from the government, from your savers, from those in power. So remember, hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. And weak men create hard times. All you can do is be prepared. So go out today and prepare yourself. That's all. Peace.